President Obama, along with George W. Bush, was in Selma yesterday for the 50th anniversary of the Bloody Sunday March, that violent turning point in the civil rights movement in which journalists played such a critical role.
The Americans who crossed this bridge, they were not physically imposing, but they gave courage to millions.
The commemoration happened in the same week that the Justice Department decided not to bring civil rights charges against Darren Wilson in the killing of Michael Brown, but issued a scathing report about racial prejudice in the Ferguson Police Department. So how has the coverage evolved since 1965? Joining us now from Seattle, Crystal Wright, a communications consultant who runs the blog Conservative Black Chick, and in New York, Julie Roginski, a Democratic strategist and Fox News contributor. Crystal, it was journalists covering Selma and other civil rights battles of that era who pricked the country's conscience, even as some of them were getting roughed up. Does that story loom large for you?
Oh, absolutely, Howard. My parents grew up in the segregated South in Richmond, Virginia, and they experienced a lot of what we know happened in Selma. But what strikes me about what happened 50 years ago, what the role the media played then was really critical. The March on Selma was one of the few times in the civil rights fight, if you will, that a news program interrupted, and one of the TV networks interrupted, and Americans of all colors watched in horror as black people were treated like animals. They were killed, they were, whipped, chased by police on horses. It was awful. But today, when I reflect back on that and then I fast forward to today, I think the role of the media really more is to stoke racial divide. It's not really to highlight as much. Right now everybody's a racist.
Let me come back to today. I just want to get Julie in on what happened at Selma and in that era. So the national press now is viewed as having played a courageous role in covering those protests, which often were violent and which often reporters and photographers were roughed up as well. But at the time, many segregationists in the South railed against the liberal media and thought they were stirring up trouble.
Well, nothing much has changed, right? I mean, you have people using the media as their whipping boy to advance potentially their own agendas, their own political viewpoints. You certainly saw that consistently over the big news events of the last week, not just the Selma March, but Netanyahu's speech, and so on and so forth. So I think that continues to be the case. The difference today, of course, is that we have many more media outlets with many more diverse viewpoints. Back then, you had the big three, and that's pretty much it, and certainly big newspapers. Today you have the Fox News Channel, MSNBC, CNN, blogs, everybody. Everybody's got an opinion.
And not only that, but most news outlets in 1965 had no black reporters, a lot more diversity in the business today. So, Crystal, you were comparing, so going from Selma, now this week we have the sort of denouement of Ferguson and Eric Holder announcing that there would be no charges against Officer Darren Wilson and Michael Brown's death. A case that many in the press turned into a cause celeb, hands up, don't shoot, that's now, according to the Obama administration, according to Eric Holder, was not true. So you were contrasting, what, the unity of the press and the role that it played in 1965 with what you see as the divisiveness today?
Well, I think, as you and Julie pointed out, in 1965 we had zero diversity in the press, and it was really the black journalists were the only ones putting a spotlight on civil rights, and that's where people were able, black Americans specifically, were able to get news about the civil rights movement. Whereas today, I think we have a diverse press corps. We have, Julie pointed that out, everybody's going to have an opinion about what is the civil rights movement today, right? What is it really? But to me, I think what happened in Ferguson became a narrative for President Obama and Democrats, particularly, to distort really what's causing more black Americans to be engaged in violent crime. Now, I'm not saying that, I think we all knew Darren Wilson wasn't going to be charged with violating Michael Brown's civil rights because the same thing happened in the Trayvon Martin case. But what it is a problem is, are you going to have racist police like you have racist journalists, like racist people? Of course. I think that the report on Ferguson was mixed. I would argue, Howard, if you had an all-black police force, a lot of the things that Eric Holder found in that report would still occur because young black men in America, the reality is, are committing more violent crime. And I think that's what's getting distorted today.
But some of those racist emails from Ferguson police officers were really blood-curdling.
Yes.
And what do you think, Julie, about Crystal's contention that the media play a racially divisive role today when it comes to these kinds of stories?
I think the media plays a divisive role, not just on race, but in a lot of different things. I mean, look, the goal is obviously to stoke debate, and the goal is obviously to stoke a potential viewpoint. And you saw Ferguson's a very good example. I mean, you had all the major channels covering Ferguson. It was saturated wall to wall. But certainly some people had one viewpoint on it, and other people were pushing a different viewpoint. And I think that's the difference. That's the difference between what happened 50 years ago and what's going on today. You know, that you do have that diversity of opinion, you do have that diversity of viewpoint, although you do still cover civil rights incredibly extensively across the spectrum. But again, the spectrum has very many different viewpoints as to what constitutes a violation of those civil rights.
I love that we have a diversity of viewpoints. I would also like journalists to stick to the facts. And as it turned out, some of the facts that were originally reported in the Michael Brown shooting, as we learn more, turned out not to be the case. Crystal Wright and Julie Roginski, thanks very much for joining us today.
Thank you.